The lights inside the ITV studio glowed warm and inviting, casting a soft morning radiance across the set that millions of viewers recognized as the cozy world of Lorraine Kelly's show. The crew bustled around in their quiet, efficient rhythm, camera operators adjusting lenses, assistants moving cue cards, producers whispering into earpieces. Everything looked polished, rehearsed, and under control. But beneath that surface, there was an unmistakable edge humming through the air. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was a careful tension, the kind that makes people trade silent glances and walk a little faster than necessary. Gary Oldman had arrived earlier than expected. He stepped into the building wearing a charcoal coat, glasses perched on his nose, his hair tousled in that endearing, effortless way. But the moment he walked through the doors, the atmosphere subtly shifted. It wasn't that he was rude, he'd greeted the staff politely, shaking hands, complimenting the receptionist on her earrings, joking with a makeup artist about the early call time. But there was a heaviness in him, a fatigue that clung to his shoulders. Weeks of interviews, red carpets, and answering the same questions had worn him down, and the producers could sense it. Even Lorraine's senior producer, who had been doing this for decades, leaned in toward a colleague and murmured, "Let's keep everything light today." Light, easy, friendly, that's how the show was supposed to be. Lorraine herself was in her dressing room, applying a final dab of powder and rehearsing the charming, upbeat introduction she planned to give. She adored having actors on the show, especially respected icons like Gary Oldman. He always brought a calm authority, a quiet intelligence, a subtle humor that delighted her viewers. Today she wanted the interview to sparkle. She didn't want friction, she certainly didn't want controversy. But Lorraine also loved a moment of surprise. A bit of cheeky poking. A comment that might nudge a guest into revealing something unexpected. It's what the audience loves, she often told her team. The band played the upbeat musical cue, the applause sign flashed, and Lorraine stepped onto the bright, cheerful set with her trademark smile. She greeted the audience warmly, chatted about trending news, teased the upcoming cooking segment, and then came the introduction she had been waiting for. And now, she declared, a man who needs no introduction, an icon of the screen, a master of transformation, the brilliant Gary Oldman. The audience applauded as Gary walked out. He smiled politely, though it didn't reach his eyes in the usual way, and lifted a hand in a modest wave before settling into the chair beside Lorraine. She leaned forward with genuine warmth. "Gary, you look wonderful. How are you?" she asked. "Tired," he admitted with a small laugh. "But happy to be here." They began with exactly the kind of conversation everyone expected. Gary spoke thoughtfully about his new film, its emotional weight, the research he'd poured into the character, the young cast he had mentored on set. Lorraine nodded in all the right places, chiming in with questions she had circled on her cards. The live studio audience listened attentively, delighted to see the Oscar winner speaking so openly about his craft. But then Lorraine did what Lorraine sometimes does. She tilted her head, gave him a playful smile, and said, "You know, Gary, you've played a lot of very intense men. Serious, brooding, sometimes downright terrifying. Do you ever worry you're too good at being difficult?" Gary blinked. "Difficult," he repeated. "Well," she said with a light laugh, "you actors can be a handful sometimes. I've heard stories, you know." Gary shifted in his chair. "Stories? Oh, don't look at me like that," she teased, tapping her cue cards against her knee. "Rumors on sets, moments where people say you're, what's the word, temperamental." The audience murmured. Gary let out a slow exhale. "I'm passionate about my work," he said carefully. "I care about getting things right." "Of course you do," Lorraine said brightly. "And we love that about you. But I heard about a very dramatic moment on the set of your last film. Something about a tantrum." Gary's expression turned to stone. "A tantrum? Oh, that's the word people used," Lorraine insisted, still smiling. "You know how crews talk." "No," Gary said, his voice firm. "I don't, and it's not true." The air in the studio thickened. Even the cheerful set decor didn't soften the sudden tension. Lorraine, however, seemed oblivious, or perhaps she simply underestimated how sharp her words were landing. "It's all in good fun," she said. "People love a bit of drama." "Drama belongs in the performance," Gary replied. "Not in fabricated gossip." Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Gary sat back in his chair, his brows raised. "Is this what you brought me on for?" he asked. "To poke at rumors, to stir something up." The instant Gary Oldman walked off the Lorraine set, the control room erupted into barely contained chaos. Producers scrambled around the narrow space like frantic air traffic controllers, urgently switching feeds, queuing backup footage, and trying to restore order to a live broadcast that had suddenly spun out of their control. Someone shouted for a commercial break, someone else shouted that they were already in one. Lorraine's senior producer, Beth, stood at the center of the commotion, headset slightly askew, face pale as she repeatedly said, "Get Gary back. Someone go talk to him. Please, someone go talk to him." Back on the main studio floor, Lorraine sat frozen on her bright yellow couch, still gripping the cue cards she had clutched moments before. Her smile, usually so composed, had evaporated the second Gary walked away. Now she stared off toward the production crew with a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. Her viewers were used to awkward moments, little flubs, the occasional testy exchange, but Gary Oldman storming off the set. That was something entirely different. It didn't just break the rhythm of the show, it shattered it. The studio audience sat stiffly in their chairs, some whispering, others staring at the empty space where Gary had stood just a minute earlier. One woman in the front row leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Did that just happen? Did Gary Oldman actually walk out?" Her friend nodded vigorously, wide-eyed, clutching her handbag like it was a flotation device. Lorraine forced herself to take a deep breath, lifting her chin slightly as she prepared to return from the commercial break. She muttered to herself, "It's fine. We'll smooth it out. It's television. Things happen." But her heartbeat told a different story. She could still feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. She had teased guests before, plenty of them, but Gary had reacted like she'd stabbed him with something sharper than words. Meanwhile, backstage, Gary was pacing the narrow corridor behind the set, his face flushed with indignation. A young production assistant, no more than 25, hurried toward him, hands up in a pleading gesture. "Mr. Oldman, sir, please, the producers are asking if you'd consider." "No," Gary said sharply. "No, I will not consider. I was invited here to speak about my work, and instead I'm subjected to petty digs about gossip." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "I'm not doing this anymore." The assistant swallowed, clearly terrified. "I understand, sir. It's just, Lorraine's very worried. And the network." Gary held up a hand, silencing him. His voice softened slightly. "It's not your fault, but I'm not going back out there. I won't." The assistant nodded sadly and retreated, tapping his earpiece as he delivered the message back to the anxious producers. Back on camera, Lorraine's face reappeared as the commercial transitioned back to the live show. Her smile was back, but it was tight, stretched thin like a rubber band close to snapping. "Welcome back," she said, her tone overly bright. "Well, live television, everyone, it always keeps us on our toes." She chuckled lightly, but nobody in the studio laughed with her. She continued, "Gary and I were having a spirited conversation, and unfortunately, he's had to step away. We wish him all the best and hope to have him back another time." Her words were measured, professional, even warm, but behind her eyes there was a flicker, something like embarrassment or irritation. But viewers weren't fooled. Within seconds, social media lit up. A clip of Gary leaving the set, caught by a camera that hadn't cut away fast enough, began circulating online. Comments exploded across every platform. What did Lorraine say to him? Gary Oldman doesn't storm off for no reason, she must have crossed a line. Lorraine went too far. Again, protect Gary at all costs. And then, predictably, the opposite reactions appeared. "Oh please, actors need to lighten up." Gary Oldman being dramatic, shocking. He can dish intensity but can't take a joke. By the time Lorraine moved on to the next segment, a cooking demonstration that suddenly felt painfully out of place, the trending bar on Twitter already said #Gary Oldman walk out. Behind the scenes, Gary retreated into a private dressing room someone had hastily unlocked for him. He sat down heavily on the sofa, letting his head fall back against the wall. The adrenaline that had surged through him moments earlier began to ebb, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. He wasn't the type to cause drama. He wasn't prone to outbursts or theatrics, not off-screen, anyway. But something about the way Lorraine had framed her comments, the dismissive laugh, the insinuation he was difficult, all of it hit a nerve that had been worn raw from weeks of non-stop press. He closed his eyes, trying to collect himself, when there was a soft knock at the door. Beth, the senior producer, entered cautiously. "Gary," she said gently, "I'm so sorry about what happened." Gary didn't open his eyes. She ambushed me. I know, Beth said. And it shouldn't have happened. Lorraine likes to push a little, but she misjudged the tone. Badly. Gary finally looked at her. Respect goes both ways. Beth nodded. I understand, and I'm not asking you to go back out there. I just want you to know we'll handle the fallout. You don't need to worry about a thing.